The time had stopped, yet the clock kept ticking at a distance. The windows were locked shut, yet she felt the goosebumps trickling down her skin, leaving her cold and numb to the bones. How long was it? Months? Decades? She felt a century passed by and she couldn't move, but in reality, only 5 seconds had passed. When he revealed his name, Jungkook, was all he said to leave her dreaded on the spot. All of her ability to function had left her body. The John Jungkook, which appears on headlines every other day, for no lesser reason than another sin he had committed. The John Jungkook, who killed his victims every time in a different way. Car blasts, strangled, stabbed, burned, tortured. He had his victims dying all those gruesome deaths. Hell, she once heard how a man's body parts were found in separate regions. She remembers how much it affected her and she ended up having fever for 3 days. The only way they could confirm it was his doing was his signature left at every site. Other than that, he never left them anything they could use to find him. A smile crept up to his lips seeing her reaction. He left her shirt and slipped his hand in his pocket. Jungkook, now, that's what I admire. You heard the rules, right? With a flick against her cheek, he left the room. As his steps faded, the home dropped to pin drop silence. It took her a long, long time to process the mere fact she was kidnapped, not by just someone, but the infamous serial killer. The next, her mind moved on to the 100 possibilities of what she shall do next. For a bigger reason, she knew she wouldn't be able to escape his home. If it was that easy, he would have never allowed her to roam around freely. But how could she go down without trying? Yet somehow, deep down, she knew trying would be the dumbest decision ever. Frustrated, she walked over to the glass wall and looked down. She recognized that place. It was the easiest spot for any killer to be found living in a friendly neighborhood. How could the FBI never found him? After hours, when she stepped out of the room cautiously, she took a whole tour of the home. He was not home, and she found nothing she could use for her help. Frustrated after trying for hours, she decided to turn on the TV. She wanted to see if there was any news of a girl being kidnapped by the serial killer, but she was met with another headline: another death of a victim by the hands of Jungkook. The man was left hung outside his home through a street pole. The remote fell off her hand as the terror returned. Right on cue, the door opened up and the owner of the home stepped in. He seemed deadlier than he did a few hours ago. He didn't look at the news once, even if he could hear what it was about. Jungkook, having fun? Wine wanted to scream and cry and hide under a blanket and never come out. When he walked up to her for the first time, she tried to run away, turned on her feet, and sprinted as fast as she could. To her dismay, she only took 2 steps before she was grabbed, pulled back, and thrown on the couch. Jungkook hovered above her. His hands supported his weight, while one knee rested beside her figure. Jungkook, there's nowhere you can run off to. From me. Wine, please. I won't complain about anything, but please, don't come near me. I'm scared. He held her hands, intertwined their fingers, and held them above her head. He nuzzled his face in her neck and moved upwards, inhaling in her scent until he reached her temple. She was hypnotized. Something stirred in her stomach. She couldn't even ask him to move away anymore. Something about his touch was so sinfully tempting. She was afraid she might fall for something bad. Jungkook, there's something I need you to do. And if you do it well, I might reward you. Wine. Reward? Jungkook, I will fulfill one of your wish. Of course, that exclude things I have already warned you about. She took a deep breath when he moved his face away to look in his eyes. Wine. What do you want me to do? Jungkook, join me for my next murder. Vine didn't know how many times within a day she would get so near to a heart attack. She wondered why she still had not had one. Vine, what are you talking about? Jungkook, you heard it. She desperately shook her head and somehow slipped out of her under him. Her whole body began to tremble with fear. Vine, no, please, I can't do this. He sat there with such ease while she cried, begged, almost passed out in fear, but at the end of the day, she stood where she feared the most. Out of his home in an abandoned building, where she saw him commit the sin, the screams of the man were going to damage her permanently. The way he died so painfully, and Jungkook had those expressions which scared her the most. She expected him to enjoy it. She expected him to have this twisted kind of personality to enjoy such gruesome killings. But he seemed dead. Those eyes, they were numb, devoid of any color, pitch black like a black hole. He scared her. She threw several times even after they had returned home. Her body wouldn't stop trembling. She was cold, almost numb. The fire coming from the heather didn't do anything to provide her warmth. Jungkook stood there by the wall and watched her. When some time passed by, he took a seat beside her and pulled her in his embrace. Her eyes were shut close. She immediately melted against her warmth of his body, the body of the man who was the reason behind her suffering. She couldn't understand why he was doing what he was doing. She couldn't understand him one bit, but in that moment, as he brushed his fingers through her hair, it provided her with peace like nothing could ever have. Jungkook, you're really clueless, aren't you? He whispered, yet she was too gone to hear him. His fingers traveled from her hair down to her body, but she was feeling too comfortable after a long suffering to make it stop. Jungkook, when you wake up, I'll fulfill your wish. And that's how they slept that night. on the floor, in front of the burning heather, in each other's arms. The world was in chaos outside, but in here, in that bedroom, the devil held the innocent girl in his arms as he provided her with peace no amount of safety or luxury could bring her. To be continued.